The National Basketball League ranks among the most popular sports leagues worldwide, and its superstars enjoy global fame that helps boost the league's marketability and revenue. Because of this, the NBA enforces strict rules to handle issues that could hurt the game's image. That said, there have been moments when players failed to follow those rules, and that's exactly what this video focuses on, as we break down the longest NBA suspensions in history. Performance-enhancing drug bans. 25 games, 4 players. In a sport built on athleticism, leaping ability, and stamina, cases of steroid use have been uncommon, but not non-existent. The NBA has traditionally maintained a relatively lenient drug testing policy, and it only began testing for certain substances like HGH a few years ago. We're not accusing anyone or jumping to conclusions, we're simply stating the facts. Even so, despite the minimal testing, Hedo Turkoglu became one of the first modern-era players to fail a drug test involving performance-enhancing substances. He tested positive for methanolin and was handed a 20-game suspension. Before Turkoglu's failed test, most drug-related suspensions were typically tied to cocaine or marijuana. Following that, Nick Calas also received a 20-game suspension for tamoxifen, which he claimed he used to prevent hair loss. Considering Nick's hairline, we can definitely understand, and maybe even approve his explanation. A few years later, Joakim Noah received the same punishment while playing for the Knicks, earning $18 million per year while barely stepping on the court. In Noah's own words, New York was too wild for him, and he was too wild for New York. So honestly, it's not hard to see how he ended up failing a drug test as well. After that, the league increased PED-related suspensions from 20 to 25 games, and both DeAndre Ayton and John Collins served 25-game bans after failing drug tests during the 2019-20 NBA season. Ayton tested positive for a banned diuretic, while Collins was penalized for using a growth hormone stimulator. Jody Meeks and Wilson Chandler were hit with identical suspensions for similar violations in 2018 and 2019. As mentioned earlier, the NBA's drug testing system was extremely relaxed for years, so it's no shock that most PED suspensions have come in recent seasons. The old days, when Stephen Jackson and Matt Barnes were tested once a year and could smoke weed before every game, are officially a past. Kermit Washington, one-punch knockout, 26-game suspension. If Kermit Washington hadn't chosen basketball, he easily could have pursued a career in boxing. He demonstrated that fact on the night of December 9, 1977, when a fight erupted between him and Rockets player Kevin Connard. The two became entangled and traded punches at center court, and it might not have been such a big deal if the chaos had stopped there. As the initial altercation unfolded, several players rushed in to separate them, one of whom was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Washington's teammate. Rudy Tomjanovich, a 29-year-old all-star forward for the Rockets, was also sprinting toward the groups surrounding Washington and Connard, trying to break up the fight just like Jabbar. Washington noticed Tomjanovich charging at him and, believing Rudy meant to attack, decided to strike first. It was a brutal headshot from the 6'8", 240-pound forward, and the damage was amplified because Tomjanovich ran at full speed straight into the punch. He collapsed instantly, and a pool of blood began spreading across the court, exposing how serious the situation truly was. Jabbar later said the sound of the punch was like a watermelon smashing onto concrete. Tomjanovich managed to walk around afterward and even verbally confronted Washington after the game before team officials rushed him to the hospital, where he was told a horrifying reality. His nose and jaw were shattered, and his face had fractured to within about 1/3 of an inch from his skull, causing spinal fluid to leak into his cranial cavity. He was fortunate to still be walking, and even more fortunate to be alive. It took 5 months before he could return to the court, but he ultimately made a full recovery. Meanwhile, Washington was handed a 26-game suspension, which at the time stood as the longest suspension ever issued for an in-game incident. Guns N' Roses. Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton combined for 88 games suspended. Bang bang, he took me down. Bang bang. Unlike the other punishments on this list, the third largest suspension ever had nothing to do with actual basketball. Gilbert Arenas was one of many NBA players who enjoyed gambling on team flights, especially a card game known as Bourre. To this day, it remains the most popular card game among NBA players, a game where thousands of dollars, Rolex watches, and even Rolls-Royces often changed hands. During one NBA team flight, Gilbert Arenas was hit with a 50-game suspension for bringing 4 firearms into the NBA locker room as part of a call your bluff stunt aimed at Javaris Crittenton. Just days earlier, Crittenden had threatened to shoot Arenas over a game of bourrée, and being the good teammate he claimed to be, Arenas brought 4 guns for Crittenden to choose from. To Arenas, it was all a joke, but Crittenden had his own loaded weapon inside the locker room, and suddenly things weren't so funny anymore. Other players scattered when the guns were drawn, and word quickly spread that firearms were present inside an NBA locker room. That was a massive violation in the eyes of the squeaky clean NBA image David Stern determined to build and protect. As a result, Stern suspended both Arenas and Crittenden for the remainder of the season. Arenas later appealed the decision and successfully got his suspension reduced to 50 games. Crittenden's punishment was lowered to 38 games, but the Wizards released him soon after, and he never played another minute in the NBA.
The Trail Sprewell choking incident, 68 games. Latrell Sprewell was among the most physically gifted NBA players of the 1990s, and NBA fans remember him as an elite defender who pushed the New York Knicks to the brink of a championship in 1999. However, he is also remembered for other reasons, most famously for rejecting a 3-year, $21 million contract extension, claiming that his kids had to eat, and that kind of money wouldn't cut it. The other reason Sprewell became infamous resulted in a 68-game suspension. The incident took place in 1997, when Sprewell was playing for the Golden State Warriors, the team that drafted him and watched him develop into a 3-time All-Star in a first-team All-NBA selection in 1994. He was clearly the team's star, and when head coach PJ Carlesimo asked him to move the ball more during practice, Sprewell was irritated and dismissed him. Carlesimo kept criticizing and moved closer to his player, and that's when something inside Sprewell snapped. He threatened to kill Carlesimo and might have carried it out if others hadn't been nearby. Sprewell grabbed the coach by the neck, choking him for nearly 10 seconds, and dragged him across the court like a rag doll before teammates and staff stepped in. After practice, reporters noticed visible marks on Carlesimo's neck and questioned him, to which he simply replied, "No comment." The NBA uncovered the truth behind the incident, and Sprewell was initially suspended for 82 games without pay, a punishment later reduced to 68. He was never quite the same player after that. Malice at the Palace. 3 players, 131 games of total suspensions. Paul Artest later changed his name to Meta World Peace. Peace was the last thing he represented. From the moment he entered the league, Artest established himself as an extremely physical player with a short fuse, the perfect embodiment of 1990s-style basketball. He never backed down. Intense, competitive, physical, and at times outright violent. In 2004, Artest won the NBA Defensive Player of the Year award. That same season, however, his Indiana Pacers lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the eventual champions, the Detroit Pistons. When the two teams met again the following season, Indiana viewed it as a chance for revenge. The matchup was heavily anticipated, and the Pacers dominated, with Artest leading them to a 15-point advantage with less than a minute remaining. When Detroit's Ben Wallace went up for a shot near the basket on which should have been one of the final possessions, Artest committed an overly hard foul and shoved him to the floor. Wallace fired back, and a scuffle broke out as players rushed in to separate the two. At first, it seemed manageable. These kinds of pushing matches happen occasionally and usually end without serious consequences. But this time was different. As Artest tried to cool himself off, he lay down on the scorer's table. Still furious, Wallace hurled a cup from across the court at Artest, sparking Pistons fans to begin throwing objects as well. One fan, John Green, was disturbingly accurate with his Diet Coke that night. He launched a cup that struck Artest square in the chest, and Artest completely snapped, charging into the stands to retaliate. Within moments, Stephen Jackson and Jermaine O'Neal followed him into the crowd, attempting to back him up. What should have remained a minor altercation between two hot-headed players turned into a full-blown scandal, with 3 NBA players fighting fans in the stands. After returning to the court, another fan confronted Artest, and he punched him before being escorted out of the arena, while cups, chairs, and various objects rained down on him and other Pacers players. It became one of the ugliest scenes in basketball history, in the game that resulted in the largest suspension in league history. Artest was suspended for 86 games, Jackson received 30, and O'Neal got 25, later reduced to 15. Together, they lost more than $11 million in salary, and to this day, the incident remains the ugliest on-court moment the NBA has ever seen, a night forever known as Malice at the Palace. Banned athletes. Beyond regular suspensions, there have been players who received multi-year bans from the league and were required to seek reinstatement before being allowed to play again. Tariq Evans is the most recent case of this situation. He was handed a 2-year ban on May 17, 2019. The ban came after he violated the league's anti-drug policy related to substance abuse, and he became eligible to apply for reinstatement in 2021. O.J. Mayo received the very same punishment back in 2016. Mayo was considered one of the top players of his generation and was selected by the Timberwolves with the 3rd overall pick in the 2008 NBA draft. He started his career with a lot of promise, averaging 18.5 points per game and quickly earning a reputation as a strong three-point shooter. Sadly, his rookie season ended up being the best year of his career, and while he remained a solid contributor, he never lived up to the expectations that came with such a high draft selection. And just as the NBA entered a three-point shooting revolution, something that would have perfectly suited Mayo's skill set during his physical prime, he was suspended by the league for drug abuse. He became eligible to apply for reinstatement in 2018, but he never submitted an application. Chris Anderson, also known as Birdman, received the very same punishment back in 2006, was reinstated in 2008, and later played a key role in helping the Miami Heat win a championship. Aside from Birdman, Mayo, and Evans, 6 additional players were given multi-year bans by the league for drug abuse, marking the longest suspensions ever issued by the NBA. By the way, you should watch this video too. I swear you will love it.